Hey, what's up guys, CodefForge here, welcome in the next video. Today we'll learn about inheritance using Java Spring Boot, JPA and Hibernate. We will focus on the mapped superclass annotation, so we'll learn how to inherit from the superclass and how to persist objects of the subclasses into the database. Yeah, and on the screen you can see the setup of the project which we will use today. All values are default. I have changed group, artifact and name. And also I have added following dependencies which we'll use. So it is H2 database, Spring Web and Spring Data JPA. So now we can generate the project and open it in the IDE. Okay, here we are. Project is already imported as the Maven project. First thing we want to do is to navigate to the source, main, resources and application properties. Over here I will paste some default properties which I am using in almost every video about the JPA and Hibernate. And if you don't know what's going on over here, I have a dedicated video about the setting up of H2 database, so I encourage you to check it out. To create inheritance, we'll need at least 2 entities, but we'll create 3 entities, so it will be easier to understand how this inheritance really works. Let's start with creating a dedicated package. So we want to go to the source main Java, and over here in the main package we want to create a new package and we'll call it model. And inside we will create 3 classes. So we will have one superclass which will be called vehicle, and we'll have 2 subclasses. The first one will be called tank, and the second subclass will be called truck. It looks good, so we'll start with the vehicle superclass. First thing we want to do over here is to annotate our vehicle class with the mapped superclass annotation. Thanks to that annotation, we will not have a dedicated table for this vehicle superclass, and also all of the mapping information created inside of this class will be applied to each class that inherits from it. Each vehicle should have ID, so we'll start with the ID annotation over here, together with the generated value annotation with the strategy set to auto. And we'll put it on the private property, which will be the type of long, and it will be called ID. Each vehicle will also have name because we want to make them personalized. So we will say private string name. And the last thing that each vehicle will have will be the number of seats. So we'll say private integer and we'll say seats. This is basically it, but we'll also generate constructors. We'll need the default constructor because Hibernate requires default constructor when deleting entities, and we'll try to do it later in the video. And also we'll generate the constructor for the name and for the seats. We'll of course use it in our subclasses. One thing to point out before we'll move to the next entities is that we are not using the entity annotation over here. And this is because we don't want to persist the vehicle object into the database, but we still can create object of the vehicle type, and to prevent it we want to mark it with the abstract keyword. So it will be abstract class. And thanks to that we will be not able to create instance of this class. So now we can move on to the tank class. Later in our code we would like to create instances of the tank class and then persist them into the database. So the first thing we have to do is to annotate it with the entity annotation. Now we want to inherit properties from the vehicle class, And to do it, we want to say extends over here and provide the name of the class which we want to extend, and in our case it will be vehicle. So right now tank entity will receive all of the properties from the vehicle class together with all of the mapping rules. And now we'll create some tank specific properties, and let's say that our tanks will have extra property which will be the type of integer, and it will be called firepower. We will also generate a default constructor which is required by the Hibernate. We go over here, we want it for the default and we select none. And we'll generate another one which we will use later to make some tests. So we will generate it for the name and for the number of the seats from the superclass, and also for the firepower from the actual class. Tank entity looks good, so we can move to the truck entity. And same story here. First of all, we want to annotate it with the entity annotation. We also want to extend our abstract class, which is vehicle, so we will say extends vehicle. And now we want to create few truck specific properties. So let's say our trucks will have max load, so we'll say private integer and it will be max load. And also second property, it will be private boolean, and let's say it will be sleeper cap. So this property will describe if our truck will have the sleeper cap or not. We'll also need the default constructor, so let's generate one. This one looks good. And also the one which we will use later in our code. So first of all, we want to call the super constructor, and then we want to assign our properties. Our entities are good to go, and now we can start our application to check out if the database structure is correct. So we go to the lifecycle, no, we go to the plugins, Spring Boot run. And after a few seconds, we will open H2 Web Console and we will check out if everything is good. Here is my web browser, and we can connect to the H2 console. And over here we can see that we have two tables, one for the tank entity and one for the truck entity, but we don't have a table for the vehicle abstract class because it is annotated with the mapped superclass annotation. If we select the data from the tank table, we can see that we have ID, name and seats, which are the columns inherited from the vehicle abstract superclass. And we have also firepower column, which is specific for the tank table or tank entity. If we go to the truck table, we have same story here. So we have ID, name and seats inherited from the vehicle class. And we have max load and sleeper cap, which is specific for our trucks. Structure looks good, so we can close it up and create repositories for our entities. First of all, we want to create a dedicated package. So we go over here on the main package. We want to create a new package and it will be called repository. Inside we will have 3 repositories. Also in the case of the repositories, we will use inheritance. So the first one will be vehicle repository. So we'll say vehicle repository. And of course, we want to create an interface, not the class. And the same goes for our subclasses. So we want to create another interface and it will be tank repository. And one more for the truck. So we go here and it will be truck repository. Let's start with the vehicle repository because this will be our superclass. And the first thing we want to do is to annotate it with the no repository bin. Thanks to that annotation, this repository will be excluded by the Spring, and it will be not possible to create an instance of this repository. But we want to make this vehicle repository extend the CRUD repository. So we want to say extends CRUD repository. And the generic type of this CRUD repository will be vehicle. So we want to say vehicle, and this is because it is a superclass for our tank and truck entities. And the primary key is inherited from the vehicle for tank and for the truck, and it is the type of long. Now we can move on to the tank repository, and in the first place we can annotate it with the repository annotation. And right now we want to say extends, and this time we don't want to extend the CRUD repository because we are doing it already in the vehicle repository, so we'll simply extend the vehicle repository interface like this. We'll do the same for the truck, so we go over here, we want to say repository, and in this case we also want to say extends vehicle repository. Okay, so we have finished the work on the repositories. Now we can go to the main class of our application, and over here we'll perform some tests. In the first place, we'll retrieve the context, so we'll create a special variable to store the reference. And now we'll retrieve the bins from the context, so we'll have vehicle repository, and we'll call this one tank repository. And using the configurable application context, we can say get bin, and we can retrieve the tank repository. So we say tank repository.class. And let's move it to the another line. And we'll also do the same for the truck repository. So we'll say vehicle repository, truck repository. And now, using application context, we can get bin for our truck repository .class. And now we are ready to create our objects. We will start with the tank, so we'll say tank, we'll import it, and we'll call it my tank. And using the constructor which we have created, we'll say new tank, and let's say it will be T150. It will have 5 seats, and the firepower will be 500. Okay, and the second object will be truck, so we have to import it, and we'll call it my truck. And again, we are using the constructor which we have created, so we say new truck, and we have following properties. So first thing is name, we will say 200M, and it will have 2 seats, and the max load, let's say, will be 36, and the sleeper cab will be set to true. Now we are finally ready to persist our objects into the database, so we'll start with the tank. So we want to use tank repository, we want to call save method and pass the my tank object. We want to do the same for the truck, but this time we want to use truck repository, call the save method and pass the my truck object. We can start the application to check out if our data will be persisted. So we want to say Spring Boot run, and we will open the web console. It is up and running. So we can navigate to the H2 console, and here it is. We can connect. Let's check out the tank table in the first place, and we can see that the object which we have created is here in the database. It's okay, and let's also check truck, and we will say run, and we can see that our truck is also here. So we can do one more test. We can close the application, and now we'll try to delete one of the entities from the database. So we'll close it up. So here at the bottom of our main class, we'll add one more extra line. So we want to say tank repository dot delete, and it will be my tank. We can rerun the application and we'll check the database again. And we can already see in the logs of our application that Hibernate executed delete statement, but let's make sure. So we'll open the console. It's here, so we can log in and select the data from the tank table. And as we can see, it's empty, so our delete statement worked. Okay, so this is everything for this video. In the future, we will probably explore different strategies of the inheritance using JPA and Hibernate. But for now, I encourage you to play a little bit with this mapped superclass approach. And yeah, this is all for today. Thank you for watching. Remember about liking and subscribing. See you next time. Bye.